Alright, so in the next few videos, talk about fairness criteria. Things that should happen in an election to make it a fair election. Our first criterion, Condorcet criterion. If there is a choice that is preferred in every one-to-one comparison with the others, that choice should be the winner. Now we call the winner who wins every comparison a Condorcet. I have a Condorcet winner on my example of head-to-head comparisons. Or we can call this individual a candidate. And if you think about it, it makes sense to every other candidates, and they win in preference when they're compared to every other candidate. They should be the winner. That seems fair. Got to take our preference table, and we're going to use the plurality method to find the winner of the election. And remember, plurality is only the first place votes, so we look at who's got the most first place votes. So let's notice that E has 342 votes in first place, D has 214, and K has 298. All right, so by the plurality method, E is going to win. Okay, so with that in mind, though, let's see if this meets the Condorcet criterion. Let's do head-to-head comparisons and see if we have a Condorcet winner and if E is that Condorcet winner. Now, we may or may not have a Condorcet winner. All right, so let's compare E with D. All right, so if we look at this column, of course, E gets these 342 votes. If we look at the second column, though, D gets the 214 votes. All right, now, if we look at our third column, though, D is preferred over E. It gets these 298 votes. Or 512 votes. Now, that means in this head-to-head comparison, D wins. All right. Now, well, let's compare E to K. Let me just scroll down a little bit, still keeping our table visible. All right, so E and K. All right, so E is going to get these first 342 again. In our second column, K is preferred over E, so it will get the 214. And in our third column, K is preferred over E, so it will get the 298. So K gets 512 here, which means in a head-to-head competition, K wins. Interesting, since E actually won the plurality election. All right. So both E and D or rather K and D are preferred by the majority of voters over E, even though E won the plurality election. You can kind of see the problem now with plurality. All right, so let's do one more comparison. We have to do D versus K. All right, so D and K. D will get the first 342 since it's preferred to K. D will also get the next 214. Now that's going to make D the winner there, but in this last one, of course, K would have gotten the 298. Now we really don't need to add that up to see that D wins because 342 is bigger. Now let's notice that D won every head-to-head competition that it was in. It won the competition against E. It won the competition against K. That makes D the Condorcet winner, or the Condorcet candidate. According to our fairness criteria, D should be the winner of this election, but it's not. E is the winner of the plurality election. So this is the problem with a plurality election, especially this one in particular. It violates the Condorcet criterion. There is a Condorcet winner here. It would be D, but in fact, in the plurality election, E wins. The second fairness criteria we're going to look at is monotonicity criterion. This is the idea that if voters change their votes to increase the preference of a certain candidate, it shouldn't harm that candidate's chance of winning. So if we make a candidate higher in our preference table, it shouldn't hurt his ability to win by moving him higher in the preference table. That just makes sense that that shouldn't happen. All right, so what we're going to do now is the instant runoff method for this particular set of voters. So let's remember that kind of starts out like plurality. We see who we've got. A has 37 votes. B has these 22 and these 12, so that's 34 for B. And then C has 29 votes. All right, and let's remember this is instant runoff, so we would eliminate C from the competition since it has the lowest number of votes. All right, so I'm going to make a new preference table with C knocked out, or I'm just going to take this shortcut this time, and that's to just knock C out like this rather than having to rewrite the preference table. And this is another way you can do this, especially if you've got it run off. All right, so now that we've eliminated C, let's go back to our plurality. Let me get out the draw feature, and let's vote again. All right, C is out of the competition. We're just looking at A and B. Let me just move that up a little bit. All right, so A gets the first 37. B gets the second 22. B also gets the 12. And then here in this last column, we see A is preferred, so A gets 29. Whoops. And we can see that A is going to win the election with 66 votes, whereas B only has 34 votes. All right, so A wins the instant runoff. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Now let's suppose for a moment that this was a poll, and that, or even that 10 of these voters who initially had thought they were going to vote this way decided that they were going to boost A up as their favorite choice. They knew that A was winning from the polls. They want to make sure A wins and not Carter or C, that last possibility. So let's suppose that 10 of them changed their votes to A, B, C. Now, putting A first, you would think, since A won the election already, that would not change the final outcome. But let's find out. So let's take 10 of these people, and they're going to change their preferences to A, B, C instead of B, A, C, putting A first instead of B. So we'll have 47 over here and just 2 there. All right, so I'm going to redo that preference table. All right, so here's the new table, moving 10 of those people over so that A was their first preference and B was their second preference. All right, so we would think A would still win, right? A now has more first place votes than it did before. All right, but let's do our runoff election. So A will have 47. B will have these next 2 columns again, so it'll have 24. And C now has 29. Okay, A would win if this was plurality, but it's a runoff. So C, or rather B now, is eliminated from the competition. Last time it was C that was eliminated first. B is eliminated from the competition. So let me go through, and we're going to mark B out of the table. All right, so now we're going to do our runoff again between A and see who wins. All right, so A certainly gets these first 47, but let's notice that C is in preference in the second column, so it gets 22. A gets these 2, but C gets these 29. And what we find here is that A has 49 votes, And C has, looks like, 51 votes. And C wins the instant runoff election. Now, if we think about this, this doesn't make sense. 10 of the voters changed their votes to prefer A. So it seems like, well, A should have still won, but it didn't win. By doing that, C actually won the instant runoff election because B got eliminated from the race. So this is a violation of that monotonicity criterion. The voters changed their votes to increase the preference for A, but it should not have harmed A's chance of winning, and it did.